And so now I'm in Israel, and there are this young Israeli boy coming into the room, and that was pretty hard to explain him. Please leave this room right now.
In French, if you had to tell a 6-year-old kid, hey, I'm doing an Android podcast now, don't disturb me, how do you say that?
Est-ce que tu peux sortir, s'il te plaît? That's when you are very calm. Or you can say, dégage de là, which means run away, please.
Dégage de là. Okay, excellent. This is basically...
No, but that's pretty violent. But anyway, holy crap, I hope we'll not release that.
It's time. From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better Android developers. I'm DonnFelker.
And I'm KaushikGopal.
Welcome to the show.
Today on Fragmented, we talk to GDE Eyal Lezmy. Eyal works as an Android developer for a company some of you folks who've been developing for some time would have definitely heard about, Genymotion. While working for Genymotion, he had to deal with the Android Debug Bridge, or as we commonly call it, ADB, a whole bunch. So in today's show, we dive into the details of ADB, some super slick and useful commands, and in general, just get an understanding of this tool that we use every single day. This was a fun episode for us, and we hope you enjoy it as much as we did. So let's get on with the show.
This episode of Fragmented is brought to you by Rollbar. With Rollbar, you can detect, diagnose, and debug production errors with ease. Let me tell you a quick story here. Just recently, I was working with an Android application, and we have a endpoint, an API that's written in Rails, and I do some Rails development too, and I was writing some changes into the Rails API that we are working with. I deployed them, and all of a sudden, I started receiving errors in our Slack channel that we had integrated with Rollbar. Now, background, we have Rollbar in our Android application as well as on our server. So I started getting these errors, I started digging into it, and all of a sudden started seeing some errors from the server side as well for various reasons. I started looking at both of them and realized that the change that I made on the API was causing a crash on the Android application because I didn't handle this weird edge case. Now, I own that. I should have written tests for it, but it was missed. It was an edge case. But it gave me the opportunity to say, like, okay, I know that this change is causing the Android app to crash. Now, unfortunately, we know as Android developers, pushing out a new version of the Android app takes some time. It's got to propagate through Google Play, if it's got to go through an approval process, the whole mess. So it's not like we can flip a switch, push out a new version of our app, and we're good. That would be the golden scenario. It isn't the reality, though. What I had to do is go back into my Rails API, implement a required fix, and then what I did is I pushed out that Band-Aid fix, and then at that point, the application stopped crashing, which was fantastic. I then went into the Android application, wrote the correct code to handle that weird edge case and the tests, of course, and then I took that and published it to Google Play. And as soon as it propagated and everyone had that new version, then what we did is then we went ahead and implemented the correct code and pulled out that Band-Aid code in the API server, pushed up a new production release, and everything was running accordingly. Now, if I didn't have Rollbar on the server and down on the client, I probably wouldn't have been able to see this too easily and would have been a real pain to figure out what was going on. So if you're interested in having this type of workflow, being able to diagnose and see what's going on inside of production errors real quickly, I highly recommend you check out Rollbar. I was able to do this all before a single email ticket came in. And I was able to implement the fix literally within 20 minutes of seeing this issue come in because I just went up and fixed the server and pushed a new release out for the server. If you're interested, you can check out Rollbar at rollbar.com/fragmented. You'll get the Bootstrap plan for free for 30 days. Again, that's rollbar.com/fragmented. And tell them the folks over at Fragmented sent you. Kaushik, here we are again.
Welcome back. How you been?
I've been good. Kind of tired today for some reason. You ever sleep like too much and then you just wake up tired?
That is a nice problem to have, in my opinion.
It doesn't happen often with me. It just is one
I
of those things where
know.
I went to bed like at 8:30 last night and I woke up like at 6:30 this morning. I was like, wow, I never get this much sleep, but now I feel tired for some reason. Anyway.
Sleep is always good.
Mm-hmm. So who are we talking today? Do you know?
Have you heard of Genymotion?
I have. I have used it as for long as I can remember. It's been one of my favorite tools for a long time.
I know, and we actually did throw in Genymotion as a recommendation quite some time back, right?
Mm-hmm. We did.
So today we have an amazing Android developer who works at Genymotion. He's also a GDE from France, and so without further ado, let's welcome him to the show. Welcome, Eyal. How are you doing?
I'm pretty fine. Thanks for having me, guys.
Pleasure is ours.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show, Eyal. For folks that are maybe not familiar with your background, could you give us a little bit of information about how you got into Android and maybe what you do now?
Yeah. So I started developing on Android in 2009. That was an internship. So I was still student at an internet and mobile provider in France. Pretty interesting project. We were remote controlling a webcam that you can just change the pan and things like that, and
nice.
That was pretty interesting. So that was my first project. Then 1 year later, I had another internship to build an Android set-top box. You know, the TV box that you have plugged to your TV. And the idea was to put Android inside with all the use case, the features that you can expect from a set-top box, but on Android. And Google TV was not still announced when I started my internship. So that was another thing I done. And then I've done a few Android projects, Android apps for my first job. Then I went back to this internet provider to work more on domotic things, a little bit with Android things. And then another experience I had was a pre-sale engineer for Samsung Electronics in France, which was pretty amazing because we were meeting a lot of people from, the biggest companies that you can have in France. And the idea was to help technically how to put Android on inside the companies. So I was on the B2B service, and that was a pretty interesting topic. And as a developer, that was extremely interesting to just go on the other side, of the frontier, because you are not working for the ecosystem, but you are starting to build the ecosystem when you are working on a manufacturer.
That's super cool. Yeah. So it looks like you've had like a lot of experience with hardware kind of stuff, right? And like emulators and like devices where you have to talk a level deeper into like the hardware side of things, right?
Yeah, when I take a step back, even if it's not my specialty and my, that's not my studies basically, but my experience, most of the time I finished. It was not like I looked for it, but to work more on the OS than on the app side. Even if I like working with apps, that's where I'm coming from, if I can tell it like that. But yeah, and I finally finished. I done another setup box on Android, and I finally finished on the Genymotion team where I'm working right now.
Originally, I think the first time I met you was at AndDevCon, and man, this is going to be like 2000. I feel like 2011 was when it was, and I happened to find out about Genymotion through some random occurrence, and I used it in a talk that I was giving there. And you guys happened to be there, actually, and you came up and introduced yourself, which was amazing, that the fact that you guys were even there. So Genymotion has existed for a little while today. I mean, for a while, but what does Genymotion provide today?
Yeah, before answering your question, Don, what I want to tell you, and to tell to all the people that are listening, so I just discovered you, and I went to you because you were signing your book. And there were this huge line of people waiting for you to sign the book that you wrote. That was pretty impressive.
Damn,
thank
Don,
you.
I don't have your book signed. I don't have a signed book. Like, that's not fair. How is that possible? It's pretty cool. Wow, even I haven't heard that story. That's amazing.
So to answer your question, the question was what Genymotion proposed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so basically, Genymotion is an Android emulator. Like many people know, we have a lot of features that we just built and put inside a product. But the thing that we try to do, because of course, there is the Android Studio emulator, which is working right now. What we want to do is to try to push this thing a little bit further for professionals. An easier way to instrument, for example, the emulator to cover the tests on a better way with, for example, we have a Java API that's something that you can embed into your tests, an API library that you can embed in your tests, Espresso tests. So from your test, you can control, for example, what's the state of the GPS, so where the device is supposed to be in the world. You can change the network throttling, and you can just combine that inside your instrumentation test. So
oh, that's pretty cool. The way that I know of doing it right now, if I have to do it with the Android Studio emulator, is like it's more or less at the hardware layer. So it's like a Boolean thing that you have to like fiddle with actual UI settings, right? But you're saying you actually provide like an API now that you can use within your tests to sort of like emulate that?
Yeah, exactly. What you have, for example, on the Java API, so you see the widgets that you can click on with your mouse. A big part of these widgets can be controlled from command line, but also from this Java library. And what we've done also is that this Java API is blocking, you see. When you go out from the method that changing the GPS position, or sending an SMS, for example, you can make sure that when you go out from this method, the SMS have been received and your application has been notified that there is a new SMS arriving and things like that.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That sounds pretty cool. So I have one question, and I've always asked people this, but I think you're like the perfect person to ask this question, right? A common thing that keeps coming up is like on Android, do we have an emulator or do we have a simulator, right? Because like on iOS, I think it's a little different. And for the longest time before, like, one of my main reasons like where I started using Genymotion was like previously the emulator was like completely really like not up to snuff, right? It was so slow, it was so bad, it would like complete, even to this day sometimes I feel it completely just like destroys my CPU, right? So that's when I started using Genymotion. But my question is, do you like, what are the internals, like why is it that even with like what we have today, it's not, sometimes I feel like the iOS people have it better because it's more of a simulator, I guess, right? Versus it being an emulator, or am I getting that wrong?
So iOS people have a simulator. So basically, what they have, I'm not an iOS expert, really. I don't know that much this ecosystem, but what I understood is that they have a simulator. Basically, they have their runtime, the application runtime that is running on their computer's desktop. So this is the iOS paradigm. And what we have for Android, and that's true for all the emulators that you heard about, they are running on the virtualization tool. So, for example, currently on the Android Studio, the virtualization technology is called HXM.
Right.
That's an Intel technology, I think.
Right.
Exactly. And for Genymotion, it's VirtualBox. So that's the reason why you have to install VirtualBox on your computer to use Genymotion. Because we have one soft running, one desktop application like Chrome or Slack or anything you have on your desktop. But on the side, we have a headless Android VM running and running the whole Android OS. So it's supposed to behave like a real Android device.
Got it. So the advantage is it's like the real thing versus like, faking it to be similar to that.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
So now there's something new you guys recently came out with as well, which is known as Genymotion Cloud. And I haven't, unfortunately, had a lot of time to dig into it. Could you give us an overview of what Genymotion Cloud is and maybe why others might want to use it?
Sure. Okay, so Genymotion Cloud, basically the Genymotion devices that you have on your computer, you can have exactly the same devices running on the cloud. I mean, by this, I mean not on your computer.
Right.
So what you do, for example, on Genymotion software, you can control all your devices from command line. So you can create a device, you can start it, etc. And you can script all these things. But from the same command line now, with just one parameter, you can start the same devices, but on our cloud. And these devices are pretty interesting because first, it does not consume your CPU locally, which is quite a good feature. That you have access similarly to these kind of devices. For example, when you start from command line a device on the cloud, you have directly and silently access to an ADB connection. So we establish silently an ADB connection to this remote device, and we make it as fast as possible. Yeah, so that's one thing for developers. Of course, you can access the display of this device from your browser, and you can also, so this is the, let's say, the developer use case. But for people that are not developers, for example, they can just start a device from the website and not from the command line if they want. They have access to the display, and they can share the display with other people, for example, for an application demo, and the other people that have access to this device can also interact with the device, like the people who created a device.
Very nice, very nice. So you mentioned ADB. You gave a talk recently on ADB, if I remember, right?
Exactly.
What exactly is it? Because ADB is like this thing. So Don and I have talked about ADB, briefly, but we've never dug in. And sometimes there are these tools that we keep using so often, but we don't actually stop to think about how it really works, right? And ADB is one of those things. And so we wanted to get the ins and outs of ADB and understand how it works. I mean, to be honest, yeah, I remember the first time someone said, "Hey, what exactly is the full form of ADB?" Because I kept saying ADB, 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 right? And then I was like, application developer bridge. But it's actually not that at all, right? So can you tell us what exactly ADB is, and in a nutshell, I mean, why have ADB?
Yeah. So basically, ADB stands for Android Debug Bridge. That's a command line tool, which is supposed to help you as a developer to communicate with an Android device. You have different kinds of devices. You have physical devices plugged through USB, etc., to network, and you have emulators.
And typically, where exactly do I find ADB? Is ADB does it come as part of Android Studio, or essentially is it in the device that we somehow sort of talk to? How does that work?
That's part of the SDK bundle, and that's on the platform tools folder. And so on the platform tools, also a package that you have on the SDK manager.
Oh, yep. So that's the one that usually when you install Android Studio to begin with, and it asks you to install a bunch of stuff. This is in the platform tools. That's basically where it comes shipped with.
I heard there's different versions of ADB. Is that correct? Is there a preview version too? And if so, do you know? I haven't actually played with this. Where is that preview version?
Actually, you can have it directly from the SDK manager. You have these, I don't remember, but okay, let's talk about the old, the standalone SDK manager with the ugly window. From
that fake sort of UI window that used to come up. Yeah.
I mean, that's not that pretty. That's not pretty, but that's functional. So that's exactly what we expect from this kind of UI, right? And you have this section, I think, with previews, and one of these packages that can appear, because it's not like they are preview all the time on ADB. It's platform tool, and you can get it. And you can switch also. If you install again the platform tool that is not a preview, you switch back to the stable form of ADB and platform tools.
Okay, so that's pretty cool that you can actually do that. I wasn't really too aware you could. But let's really get down to the brass tacks of ADB in general. I am, I've been an Android developer since around 2008. ADB has been part of my daily workflow, and I think it's become, for a lot of developers out there, just one of those things that we just use. I need to know what my device's serial number is or whatever. I just type in ADB devices and I get some information back. But what a lot of people don't really understand under the hood, and I'm fairly certain I don't understand most of it, is how does ADB work under the hood? Can you give us an overview of what ADB is, like how it's architected, maybe how it works in general?
So physically, if we can say this, you have two binaries composing an ADB communication. One is hosted on your computer, and the name of this binary is ADB, and that's the command line that you use. And you have an ADB daemon inside every Android device. So if we focus on the ADB binary on your computer, this binary will be both a client and a server. So the client is really the binary that you will launch, that you will the command line that you will use. This is the client. The server is started automatically when you type a command. And from the ADB, you know there is a fork of process on your desktop, and it will run continuously the server as soon as you turn off or you kill this process. And actually, this server will persist and will continuously maintain a TCP connection with all the ADB daemons of all the devices it's connected to.
I remember in the early days, like, when the emulator used to like conk off, we used to do like this ADB stop server, kill server rather, right? ADB kill server and ADB start server. So that's specifically what's happening. So if I think about my machine now, I have this binary that you talk about, which is again composed of two parts. There's like the client and server within this binary itself.
Exactly.
And it's the server specifically that I'm basically starting and stopping. So actually like the meat of all of this is in the server, right? Like the client is almost sort of like an API to that server. Is that like a right way to think about it?
Yeah, it's an API, but actually, if we try to structure the communication, so you have the ADB client that will handle all your orders from command line. This ADB client will transmit these orders to the ADB server, and the ADB server will transmit to one or several devices the command you ask at the beginning. So, and between the client and the server, there is a specific protocol, and between the server and the daemon running on the device, there is another kind of protocol. And that's the reason why, for example, you see sometimes when you update your ADB or when sometimes you install Genymotion and you see it's not working anymore with Android Studio. Mm-hmm. And what we advise to do is to change the setting on Genymotion to use the ADB from your Android Studio instead of ours, the one we embed in our soft. It's typically because an ADB client and an ADB server can have different versions, and they can sometimes not be compatible with each other. And this is due to the protocol between the client and the server that can sometimes evolve and breaks the compatibility.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense now, actually, especially thinking about like the things we used to do with ADB, right? So quick follow-up question on, you said, okay, so there's like this client server sort of binary that exists on my machine, and then there are ADB daemons on the Android device or like the emulator, right? Or the other clients. Is it one ADB daemon per client? Or like every time you spin up like a separate process or like you're executing something, there are multiple ADB daemons inside each device? Or is it just like one single global thing? So on my Pixel phone that I have now, is there like an ADB daemon that's running there now? Or is it just one ADB daemon?
Yeah. So actually the ADB daemon is started at the init of the system, and it's called system service, and it's actually launched by the system, and it's also maintained by the system. So if ADB daemon crashes, it's all directly restarted by the system. Yeah, this is part of the system management from the Android operating system. That's a kind of feature. That's that's part of the way the system is structured. You have these kind of daemons that are automatically restarted when they shut down if they attacked our system or persistence. Sorry.
So quick question: when I do ADB devices, right? Like Don talked about using this command, and we see a list of like those devices. How exactly does that work? Is that essentially the client communicating to the server, and then the server pinging all connected daemons? Like, does it ask the daemon, and like what we see is actually like the ADB daemon? Is like that how it works?
So to answer this question, what I can do, for example, is to explain or try to explain, sorry, what kind of devices there are, what kind of Android devices there are, and the way they can communicate with ADB, okay?
Oh, perfect.
And then I can answer this question. So first, you have physical devices that you can, for example, plug through USB, okay? You also have other kind of devices like the emulators from Android Studio. That's one kind of device. And you have other devices that we can call them network devices. For example, Genymotion is one of them. But also a physical device where you enable the Wi-Fi, the TCP connection for ADB are part of these network devices. Okay, so the ADB server, when you start it, it will directly on your computer look for Android devices on the USB ports, and it will detect it automatically. So you have a kind of a loop looking for new Android devices all the time. And that's the same for Android Studio emulators. Android Studio emulators, when they are started, there is a range of ports on your machine where ADB of these devices will be connected to. And the ADB server will kind of crawl all this port range to check for an ADB connection on it. And it will maintain a TCP connection when it finds a USB device or an Android or an emulator, an Android Studio emulator. And on the other side, you have network devices that you can, from the client side, so from as a user, ask to connect to. So you can type, for example, ADB connect, the IP of the device, and the port of the device. By default, it's 5555. And then you have all these devices potentially connected to your ADB server, and this ADB server will maintain a TCP connection. So now to answer your question, when you type ADB devices, the ADB client will discuss with the ADB server to know to all the TCP connection maintained by the ADB server, all the connections, the device connection maintained by the ADB server, and get all the information from each device connected to the ADB server currently, and display it for you.
So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with ADB. And again, this has been exposed to me in various different forms through numerous different developers I've encountered in my career. And I think it'd be kind of cool if we talked about some of those cool different things that we've seen and done inside of ADB. And, I'll just go first here. One of the things that I really like to do with ADB, which is if I'm working with an app that has maybe like a broadcast receiver or something like that, is actually to use a lot of the components of ADB Shell to interact with the app. So maybe I can start an activity or even interact with a particular broadcast receiver by sending a broadcast using like ADB Shell, AM broadcast, and then you provide it some intent and so forth, and it can actually send some information to a broadcast receiver. So those are just, at a high level, some of the cool things I like doing with it. Kaushik, I know that you've used it before. What's some of the things that you've done with ADB that have been pretty cool?
When you want to input any text into like an edit text field in an Android emulator or device, there's this ADB shell input text. Or actually, I don't recall what it is exactly, but with ADB, you can actually input text onto your device, right? Especially if you have like a crazy user, a crazy password and like a username, it makes it really easy to just paste that command on your terminal and then like have that come into pop up onto your device, right? So I use this all the time.
Now, a quick question for you. I guess, we're talking about, we already hopped right into ADB Shell. Do you have like a high level overview of it? What exactly is ADB Shell?
Okay, so basically what you see the Linux shell, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty common. So what ADB Shell command provides the user is an access to a shell running on the device, like SSH can propose. That's really the way.
Okay.
So when you type ADB Shell, you have access to a shell from as a user on the user land of your device.
Now, if I type ADB Shell by itself, does that put me directly into that shell that's on the device?
Yeah, exactly. So when you type ADB Shell and only this, you will have access to a kind of persistent shell that you can close by typing exit, for example.
Okay.
And really the feedback that you will have are the one from the device and not anymore from your computer.
Okay.
Like you will do with an SSH to a remote server, Linux server. That's the same.
Okay, so I guess the one-line commands that Kaushik and I are talking about basically just tell, hey, ADB Shell, I want you to input some text, and here's this blob of text I want you to input. Or, hey, ADB Shell, here is an intent that I want you to either start or to broadcast or whatever. And it just kind of does that and then just returns. Would that be correct?
Yeah, exactly. So you type ADB Shell, and then the command you want to run on the device, it will execute the command and then quit and come back to your computer's command line when it will finish.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up question. So with this ADB shell, right? Do we have access to like all ADB shell devices, or is it like something that you can only get on rooted devices? Is it only on emulator, or is this available to everyone?
Actually, when you open ADB Shell, I think you have access as the same user rights that the ADB daemon have been started with.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So, for example, on standard mass production device, you should, and I hope for you, you are on the user land, so you have not access to too much things from ADB, for example, the root and things like that, so you are not system. But there is an ADB command I don't really remember, that allows you to change to another user. For example, when you have an application installed and you want to have access to the private files of this application, I don't recall the name of this command line, but you can type this command line and the ID of the application you want to switch to, and then your user will change, and you will have access to the private files of this application.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, me neither.
Hey, now I can only imagine with the work that you've done at Genymotion and how much you've been involved with it, low-level Android stuff, especially with that early on with the set-top box, which you were talking about, that you've really had to get to know ADB in and out. What are some of the cool things that you've done with ADB that you could share with the listeners?
The most interesting things I had to do was extremely interesting, but very boring to speak about. Basically, the feature I had to develop and that made me learn what ADB is composed by is to build the ADB tunnel that you have from your computer to a remote Genymotion Cloud device, and how to protect it, how to make it as fast as possible, etc. You know, because that's a remote device, so the latency is different. And I hope we've done a pretty good job on that. So that was pretty interesting, but technically, I'm not sure I can tell too much about what I've done, but anyway,
Okay.
it's boring, really. If people want to learn a little bit more about what I've learned, I think you will put on the show note the presentation I gave to Droidcon New York about that, because it's so boring that you need schematic to understand and to have a real vision on what is really to learn on that. So that's one of the things I've done that was extremely fascinating, but very boring to speak about, to be honest.
Okay, we'll make sure to add a link in the show notes to that. But I recall, like, from your presentation, right, you talked about this device called Sooner, HTC Sooner.
Yeah.
There's something interesting. Can you tell us what the deal is there?
Yeah, so I was trying to building the talk last summer, and I told you this topic is extremely interesting but very boring to speak about. And in a conference, if you don't have something funny at one time to tell, everybody will sleep, and me first. So I was trying to go into to dive into the codes, finding some things like Easter eggs, things like that. And maybe I will tell something about that later. But anyway, I've seen that when you type the ADB command, you have the help of the ADB. So you have all the manual, how to use it. And there is one argument that is very for a command allowing you to target one device. That's really for OS developers, so really not for app developers. So we don't care about this argument. But on the documentation, it was told something like you can target devices like, and in parentheses, example, Sooner. And I never heard about that device before. Actually, I did for a previous presentation, but so I remembered this story about the Sooner. So, do you know, guys, what the Sooner?
No, what
Actually?
is this?
No.
Okay. So the device, this device is the very, very first Android phone that has never been released. It has never been released.
Really? Oh, so it's
Yeah,
not even
yeah.
the G1. There was this thing called the Sooner before the G1?
Yeah, exactly. It looks like a BlackBerry phone. And it was supposed to be released, and because the Android OS takes quite a long time to finally be stabilized, etc., the hardware of this phone was a little bit outdated. So they decided to drop this phone and take the G1. Yeah, maybe we'll put a few links on the show note about all this story. There is a huge debate with Diane Agborn about why the Sooner has not been released, etc. So there were a debate. I don't want to enter into the debate. You will see all the sources, I think, on the show notes. But there is one fun thing about this story is the reaction of Andy Rubin learning what the first iPhone was. And when he's seen what was the hardware, what was the user experience, he tells to his colleague, partner, holy crap, I hope we'll not release that phone or something like that. And which was a pretty surprising reaction, right? And finally, it didn't. It had not been released, but not because okay. There is a debate on that point, or because it was a crappy phone, or because technologically the Android OS was not ready at that moment, and they had to change to another hardware.
So one may ask why the HTC Sooner was not released any sooner. Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm looking at this thing right now, and we'll put the link in the show notes. This thing is ugly.
Ghastly. It looks
it's horrendous. Like, I am so glad this didn't come out.
Yeah.
Like, it's the G1 is a definite 10x improvement over this thing. So we'll put a link in the show notes. Check it out.
Yeah, that's vintage now, not ugly,
Yeah, exactly. That's the right way to term it. I mean, damn, if anyone gets a hold of one of these devices, I'm pretty sure it must be this thing is like a piece of history, right?
Exactly. Yeah, really. I never had any Sooner in my hand, but I really hope one day I will just find a way to just touch one.
Keep it in the museum of your house. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. You take a selfie with a Sooner and publish it.
If that's even possible. I mean, with that thing, I don't even know if that would be possible.
Half a megapixel.
All right. So, Don, what are some other cool commands that we think we can talk about? Does anything pop into your head?
Yeah. I feel like we'd be doing the Android community a disservice not to mention like the elephant in the room, which is ADB logcat.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Is the one everyone uses. But at some point, if you've ever like fired up ADB logcat, it's just like this fire hose of information, especially if you have a ton of apps on your device. You're like, I have no idea. So of course you can do like filtering on ADB logcat and all that's possible. But there's also other tools that folks have built around this, like such as like pidcat, which allows you to actually filter based upon the current application or whatever package I believe it is. And then it also does nice coloring for you, which is pretty cool as well. But for me, what I'm the only ones I really end up using, and I'm just going to kind of list them out here, is ADB push and ADB pull to push and pull files to the device quickly. I may need to push like a JSON file up there. Or I may need to, simulate something that was already downloaded looking in a folder somewhere. And then I also have ADB reboot, which I'll then sometimes just use to reboot the device if I need to.
Oh, so ADB reboot is like almost like a restart, not just like this server ADB daemon killing and restarting. This is basically, hey, no, really, restart my device.
Yeah, just reboot the device. Yeah. But the ones that I really spend all my time on are all really inside of ADB Shell. Just yesterday, we were debugging an issue at one of my clients because the Android dialer, when we passed it a certain intent, would work a particular way. If we passed it like an extension number, it worked fine on my Nexus 6P, but we tested it on a couple of other devices and had just varying results. Sometimes the dialer would accept the extension, sometimes it wouldn't. But being able to do that from an app, which is traditionally how you'd want to test it, was just cumbersome to try to pass it around to all these different devices. So what we ended up doing is just creating the ADB Shell intent and then just dropped it in Slack and connected whatever devices we had and just fired off the intent to see what would happen. So I spend all my time in ADB Shell and using things in that area. But what about you? What do you use? Anything else?
I think we should also definitely mention like friend of the show, Phillipe. He has like this plugin with IntelliJ, right, called ADB Idea. So like that's something that people have gotten super used to. So they keep forgetting the ADB commands. We'll drop a link in the show notes to that as well. But I've sort of like, because I have it built in my history, like I just keep using the ADB commands directly from command line. Eyal, what about you? Do you tend to use like any of these ADB commands? Like what are some commands that you can think of?
Actually, yeah, my use cases are pretty basic with ADB, and all these better things like shell, and diving into the files and things like that are pretty handy. And on Genymotion, for example, you don't really need switching the user ID, as I told before, because you are root. So by default, it's pretty interesting. And we are most of the time working with the system. So the root is enough for me as a developer. So yeah, but I learned a few things diving into the ADB source code. For example, maybe the pm install command.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but for I don't really know when. I don't remember, and that was a few months ago, so I have a pretty bad memory on that. But in next versions of ADB, pm install won't be used anymore. For application installation, they will use instead cmd package install, which is another binary, which is apparently more powerful. So there are a few things that you will maybe in the future won't use anymore when you want to interact and install on a device. That's the things that I've discovered.
Yeah, there's one I forgot to mention that I use actually quite a bit all the time with client applications. Especially if my application is based upon just field testing it, which I think you've done before many times, Kaushik, is take the app out, use it like the customer would use it that's going to use your application. And then all of a sudden you encounter some really weird behavior or the app crashes and you think like, oh, why did that happen? But for some reason, you're far enough away from your laptop where you don't have enough time to get back before that ADB log is gone. You know what I mean? Have you been in that situation?
Oh, for sure. All the time.
So a lot of times what I've done, if I've kind of been in that situation or if my laptop is close enough by and I've connected it, what I would actually do is normally I would issue a command, which is just ADB bug report, and that will actually kick off a full ADB bug report, which contains a slew of information about the current system state, the logcat, all that kind of information gets dropped down. But if for some reason you're not next to your computer, you can also do that if you enable it. I think it's in development tools. You hold down the power button, I think you can actually select bug report, and then it will generate the bug report for you. So if you're out in the field, you can kind of simulate that same bug report behavior. So that's always pretty helpful, so you can review it later.
Wow. ADB bug report. You know what? I haven't actually heard about this. This is the first time I'm actually looking into this. Wow.
Yeah, the file that generates is massive. It's huge. It's got tons of data in it, and then you'll have to scroll through and find the actual logcat that's in there, and the bug report that's inside of that you can issue from. I think the power button will do the same thing, but it's useful because if you're not next to a computer, you can fire that off. It takes a few minutes to generate sometimes, and then it will let you know that the file is generated. And what I'll normally do is just add it to Dropbox, and then when I get back to my computer later, I'll open the file up and figure out, all right, why did we get this crash or whatever.
So talking about that, what you said, Don, there is a way to access to a remote device using your local ADB on your computer. If your device is already connected to an ADB server on your local network. So if we consider ADB, we have two parts, one ADB client and one ADB server. From your local computer, you can access to a remote ADB server somewhere on your local network.
Oh, so actually Don was asking the question, is this the same as the Wi-Fi?
Okay, Wi-Fi debugging is one way to do it. So when you have your device on your local network and you have this IP, its IP, you can do an ADB connect and then have access to this device on your local network. But sometimes on other companies, you have all these devices plugged to a kind of a device farm. So that's a few servers running an ADB server connected continuously to devices used for CI purpose or things like that. And what you can do is from your computer, if you know the IP of this remote ADB server, so this remote server, you can use your local ADB client connected to this remote ADB server. For example, you have the option minus capital H, and then you put the IP of the remote ADB server, and minus capital P with the port. So by default is 5037. That's the default ADB server port on your computer. And then devices or shell, etc. And you have access to these remote device farm directly from your ADB client.
Oh, that's pretty slick. Yeah, because I only knew of the same thing that Don talked about, where over Wi-Fi you can do it. But you're saying essentially you can just connect to. It's almost like a direct connection, right? Like old school, sort of like SSH connection is point exactly to that server, and then if that's connected, you can just use that.
Exactly. But if you have a real physical access, maybe the Wi-Fi, the wireless debugging is easier. But if you don't have a wireless access, you just have the IP of the remote server. This is one way to do it. And to come back on the way to on the production devices, simple devices that you didn't root, and you want to have access to private files on an application. I think that's possible only if the application is compiled on debug mode. So you can do ADB Shell, then run dash as in minus, and then the package of the application, and then your user will switch to the application user. Every application on your computer, on your Android device, have a specific user ID, and you can switch to this ID and have access to all the private files, databases, etc.
Oh wow! So just that I'm understanding this right. So if I'm using my actual device like a Pixel, and I deploy a debug APK onto my device, I can use this ADB shell run as command and provide the package name, and then actually have access to the private file. So if I have a database file or something stored in.
Exactly.
Ooh, that's pretty slick. I like that.
There's a couple other ones here that I wanted to share as well that I always found very interesting. One is ADB EMU. So that's where you can run an Yeah, ADB EMU, like emulator, but EMU.
Oh, got
That's
it.
where you can run an emulator console command. So you send like a console command to the emulator. And for example, the key, and I have a lesson on Caster.io, it's a free one we can link to, that shows like if you're going to be working maybe with like fingerprint authentication, which I recently was, and I needed to test fingerprints and provide a fingerprint, how do you do that with an emulator? Or what if you have a device that doesn't have a fingerprint sensor? You have to use the emulator, but how do you put your fingerprint on an emulator? It doesn't work. So they have...
I can't jab my screen. That doesn't work.
You can do that. Just let me know what happens. But no, you can actually tell ADB EMU to say, hey, I want you to go ahead and touch a finger, finger number 1. And then it will actually emulate touching a finger to the simulated hardware for a fingerprint sensor, which is pretty cool.
That is amazing.
And there's other commands you can, you provide and so forth. So that's one of them. The other one, which I think you may find really interesting, Kaushik, is actually ADB Sync. And that's where you can copy host to device files only if changed and so forth. So if you want to sync files between a particular folder on your local machine with a device, you can actually just type ADB Sync, provide the directory, and magic.
Yeah, ADB Sync is it's a command that is pretty commonly used by system Android developers to sync the device, the remote device, the physical device, or the emulator with their own local output after an Android open source project compilation. So if you, for example, change the code on a daemon, you compile again the OS, the Android, the AOSP project, and then you do an ADB sync, and it will change all the daemons and restart them automatically. So that's pretty convenient when you can do that when you develop on the Android OS.
That's pretty slick. Yeah, I haven't run into a situation where I've done that, but it's pretty good to know.
And then I think the last one I want to mention that are interesting to folks. If you're developing on your local machine, you have let's say you're running a Rails server, a Node.js server, and you're having trouble connecting to it from your device or from various other locations, you'll want to look into ADB Reverse and ADB Forward. It allows you to reverse and forward ports and so forth, so you can actually maintain certain connections in either direction. So it kind of depends on your situation. You'll just want to take a look at each one of those.
That's pretty cool. This is something I've never heard of. I've never used them. A lot of homework today. All right, yeah, this has been very enlightening. Like I said, there's a lot of homework I got to do. Got to open up ADB, check out all those new commands that both you and Don have been telling me. This was extremely useful. Thank you so much for all the information.
Thank you for having me. Really, it was a pleasure, really.
So if folks want to reach out to you, right, if they want to talk to you about ADB or even ask about Genymotion and other cool stuff, what's the best way they can do that today?
They can find me on Twitter or other social network, but maybe the easiest way is to give you my personal website where there are no content at all, only my social network links. And the website is eyal.fr. So that's EYAL.fr.
Nice.
And you got all the links there.
Don, you seem to know a thing or two about ADB as well. You have these cool commands up your sleeve. So if folks want to do that, or if they want to get a signed book from you, which I think I might also need to hit you about, how do folks do that?
You can reach me at DonnFelker on Twitter. It's going to be the best way. What about you, Kaushik? How do they get a hold of you?
I'm at KaushikGopal on Twitter. That's my handle. And if folks have any other questions, Fragmented Cast is the Twitter handle for our podcast. So thank you all so much for listening, and do reach out to us. And again, Eyal, thank you so much. This was so informative. Once again, we want to thank Rollbar for sponsoring today's show. With Rollbar, you can catch code errors even before your users do. Remember, they support a gazillion platforms and have support for some really cool, nifty integrations. We have a special offer for Fragmented listeners. Go to rollbar.com/fragmented. Sign up and get their Bootstrap plan for free. Thanks again for supporting today's show, Rollbar. That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by DonnFelker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. Sarah the Amazing Jackson from the Spec Network helps with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme and ad music is by the national recording artist Blueprint from Weightless Recordings. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.